The room smelled faintly of bleach and something older, like time itself had stopped cleaning. A lone strip of sunlight crept through the blinds, carving a pale line across the peeling wallpaper. The clock on the nightstand blinked 5:12 a.m. in tired red digits. Malcolm Reeves lay awake, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling as if answers might be written there. He had barely slept. The hum of the motel fridge, the distant highway, the ghosts of his own ambition, they had all kept him company through the night. When the first truck rumbled past outside, he sat up, exhaled, and said quietly to himself, "Showtime." His reflection in the mirror didn't look like the one that usually filled glossy business magazines. The crisp suits and silk ties had been replaced with a faded navy hoodie and a pair of jeans so old they had forgotten their original color. His hands, once manicured, once symbols of control, were now dry, cracked from nerves and cheap motel soap. He practiced his new name out loud, testing the sound of it. Mike Rivers. Delivery driver. The words tasted foreign. He tried again, adjusting his voice lower, rougher, like he used to speak before the boardrooms and investor calls trained him to sound harmless. It felt strange, pretending to be ordinary. But ordinary was what he needed to remember. He zipped up his jacket and caught himself pausing. The face that stared back wasn't just a disguise. It was a confession. He wasn't here for publicity or moral optics. He was here because the stories had finally gotten to him. The videos, the leaked recordings, the young woman crying because her manager called her lazy for asking for a day off to take her child to the doctor. He had built an empire on this system, and somewhere along the climb he'd stopped looking down. He heard his mother's voice then, soft and sharp, the way it used to cut through the fog of early mornings. Work twice as hard, be twice as good, and never forget where you came from. He had carried that advice like scripture, but maybe, he thought, he'd twisted its meaning along the way. Outside, the sky was still half asleep, painted in bruised shades of blue and orange. The air bit through his jacket as he walked to the parking lot, his breath visible in the chill. His rental van sat beneath a flickering light, the logo of his own company printed across the side. Ironically, the perfect disguise. No one looked twice at delivery drivers. He slid into the seat, turned the key, and let the low hum of the engine settle his nerves. He thought about the meeting last week, the boardroom full of polished faces and polite smiles. They'd discussed efficiency or cost containment, workforce optimization, words that sounded bloodless. But the people behind those words weren't numbers. They were mothers, sons, veterans, people who came home with their backs aching and their hope thinning. Malcolm gripped the steering wheel tighter. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He felt like an imposter in his own kingdom. The GPS directed him to the edge of a dying town, where the company's oldest franchise still stood, a squat, beige building with a sign that flickered like a dying heartbeat. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a pickup truck and a lone employee mopping the floor through the window. He parked across the street, took a deep breath, and studied the place. The glass was fogged with grease. The paint peeled around the doorframe. The sign above the entrance, burgers, biscuits, coffee, hung slightly crooked like it had given up trying to stand tall. This was where he'd started. Same chain, different year, different man. He stepped out of the van, feeling the crunch of gravel beneath his boots. His pulse quickened. His disguise was good, too good. No one would recognize him here, not under the worn cap and the downcast eyes. But still, a strange dread crawled beneath his skin. Maybe it wasn't the fear of being caught. Maybe it was the fear of being seen for who he really was. The automatic doors sighed open, releasing the warm scent of frying oil and coffee into the cold morning. The world inside glowed with a weary yellow light. A young woman behind the counter looked up, offered a tired half-smile, and said, "Morning, what can I get you?" Her voice pulled him back decades, to a version of himself standing behind a similar counter, wearing the same uniform, repeating the same line to strangers who never saw him. He smiled softly, lowering his eyes like he used to. Just coffee, black. As she poured, he watched the steam rise between them, like the past trying to speak through the present. And as he took his first sip, he felt the weight of something shifting inside him. Not just guilt, not just curiosity. It was the feeling of a man returning to the scene of his own forgetting. And deep down, Something told him this wasn't going to be just breakfast. The restaurant was already alive with the low hum of routine, the hiss of grease, the shuffle of shoes on tile, the steady thump of an overworked coffee maker. A neon clock above the register blinked 6:03 a.m. in stubborn red digits. Outside, dawn was still deciding whether to arrive, and inside, everyone moved like they'd already been awake for a lifetime. Malcolm took a seat in the far corner booth, the one closest to the window, where the glass was streaked from years of rain and neglect. From here he could see everything without being seen, the rhythm of survival playing out behind the counter. The young woman who'd taken his order earlier, Keisha, according to her name tag, worked with a kind of quiet precision. Her hair was pulled back tight, her expression composed but tired. She managed the register, refilled napkin dispensers, called out orders, and still found time to smile at the older man at the grill, who muttered curses under his breath as the tickets piled up. "Order up. Double bacon, no tomato," the cook barked, slapping the sandwich onto the counter. His name tag read Ron. His beard was grizzled, his hands calloused, his eyes hard. There was a faded tattoo of a flag on his forearm, half hidden, half faded, like a memory of better days. Keisha picked up the tray, delivered it to a truck driver who grunted a thank you, then turned to Malcolm. "You want a refill, hun?" He hesitated. "Yeah, sure. Thanks." As she poured, he noticed the thin tremor in her wrist, the kind you get from working too much and sleeping too little. She smiled again, faint but kind, then turned back to the register as another customer stepped forward. Malcolm sipped his coffee and watched. Every movement here felt familiar. The exhaustion, the rhythm, the unspoken hierarchy of those who had been broken in by repetition. It wasn't the same company he'd left behind years ago. Or maybe it was, and he'd just chosen not to look too closely. The bell above the door chimed. Two teenagers came in laughing, their voices sharp against the dull hum of the morning. They ordered dollar menu sandwiches, scrolled through their phones, and left without saying thank you. Keisha didn't flinch. She'd seen worse. Then it happened. Ron leaned toward the fryer, voice low but not low enough. "Guess the boss is still sleeping off his champagne while we feed the help." It was a mutter, casual, tossed out with the grease. But the words hit Malcolm like a slap. His jaw tightened. He didn't look up, didn't move, just let the sound echo in his head. The boss. They had no idea who they were talking about. He was invisible here, and yet every syllable landed like truth. Champagne. The help. A life divided neatly between those who ate and those who served. Keisha glanced at Ron, her face softening in warning. "Come on, don't start that," Ron shrugged. "Just saying. You think any of those suits give a damn about what it's like down here? Look at this place. Fryer's broken. Paycheck's late again, and we're still smiling for the cameras." Malcolm's fingers tightened around his cup. He could feel his pulse rising, heat creeping into his chest. But he said nothing. Keisha lowered her voice. "Not all of them are the same," Ron snorted. "You keep telling yourself that." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the kind of weariness that doesn't come from the work itself, but from the feeling that no one sees you doing it. Malcolm's coffee had gone cold. He stared into it like it might offer an answer. He thought about the glossy reports he'd read, the charts, the metrics, the scripted optimism. He'd built a machine so big it had swallowed faces like these. Keisha passed by his booth again. "You okay, Mike?" He looked up at her, the way her eyes carried both strength and sadness, and managed a small smile. "Yeah, just thinking." "Don't think too hard," she said softly. "Nothing in this place makes sense when you do." She walked away, and the sound of her sneakers against the tile felt like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something he couldn't yet name. Outside, a freight train groaned somewhere beyond the horizon. The sun was climbing higher now, spreading pale light across the parking lot. From where he sat, Malcolm could see his reflection in the window, part of him inside, part of him out. He watched Ron at the grill, Keisha at the counter, and the tired old sign above the door that still promised quality you can taste. And for the first time in a long time, Malcolm wondered if his success had come at a cost he could no longer afford to ignore. He lifted his cup, staring into the black swirl, and thought, they think the boss is asleep, but maybe, just maybe, this was the morning he finally woke up. The morning rush had faded. leaving behind the faint scent of burnt coffee and grease that clung to everything like truth you couldn't wash off. The restaurant had quieted into that strange mid-morning lull. Too late for breakfast, too early for lunch. Sunlight spilled weakly through the fogged glass, catching on the dust motes that drifted lazily through the air. The fryer hissed occasionally, the soda machine hummed, and somewhere behind the counter, the old radio whispered the blues. Malcolm stayed in his booth, pretending to scroll through his phone, though he wasn't seeing the screen. He'd been there nearly 2 hours, watching the rhythm of the place, feeling the weight of the whisper still echoing in his mind. Guess the boss is still sleeping off his champagne. That one sentence had scraped something raw inside him. He'd built this world, the uniforms, the policies, the slogans. He'd told himself it was opportunity, a ladder, a way out. But looking around now, he saw only people running in circles, chasing the illusion of a rung that kept moving higher every year. Keisha was wiping down tables with a rhythm that spoke of habit, not thought. She hummed under her breath, a soft gospel melody that sounded like a conversation with herself. Every so often, she'd glance toward the grill, where Ron grumbled at a delivery driver about a missing box of frozen patties. "Man, I've been calling the supplier for 2 weeks," Ron said, his voice sharp. "Corporate don't care. They just cut another 10 hours off the schedule and tell us to optimize workflow." The driver shrugged. "Ain't my call, brother. I just drop 'em off." Malcolm shifted in his seat listening. Each complaint, each small frustration, stacked on top of the last, an invisible mountain of resentment built from years of being unseen. Keisha passed by him again, balancing a tray of dirty dishes. He caught her eye for a moment. There was something in her look, curiosity, maybe recognition, that made his heart stumble. He offered a polite smile. "You ever get used to it?" he asked quietly. She paused, resting the tray on her hip. "Used to what?" "The pace, the noise, the pressure." Keisha laughed softly, not unkindly. "Used to it? No, you just get tired enough that you stop fighting it." "That's not the same thing." Her honesty hit him harder than he expected. There was no bitterness in her tone, only exhaustion, worn smooth like river stones. He wanted to ask more on how long she'd been here, what she wanted to do next, why she stayed. But the doorbell chimed and 2 customers walked in, pulling her away before he could find the words. He turned back to his coffee, now cold again, and stared at his reflection in it. His disguise felt heavier by the minute. The hoodie, the worn jeans, it wasn't just a costume anymore. It was a mirror showing him who he might have been if life had tilted a few degrees differently. Then he heard it. Another whisper, soft but deliberate, floating from behind the counter. "That's him," someone said. "The one from the photo." Malcolm froze. The words sliced through the hum of the fryer, the low murmur of the radio. He didn't look up, didn't breathe. "What you talking about?" Another voice whispered back. "The CEO," the first voice said, lower now, almost conspiratorial. "Malcolm Reeves. Tell me that don't look like him." He could feel the weight of their glances. His palms began to sweat. The booth suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. He reached for his cup to steady his hands, but it rattled against the table. The sound was small, but in that moment it felt like thunder. Keisha's voice cut through the tension. "Both of y'all better get back to work before I tell Ron you're standing around gossiping." The whisper stopped. Feet shuffled. The fryer hissed again, but when Malcolm dared to look up, Keisha was already looking at him. Not suspicious, not accusing, but knowing. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and he could see it there, recognition. She turned away quickly, calling an order number, but her posture had changed. She stood taller now, more alert, like someone guarding a secret. Malcolm sat frozen, his heart pounding in his throat. How could she know? Had she seen one of those old magazine profiles? The television interviews? Or maybe, and this thought struck him like a lightning bolt, maybe she'd worked at another franchise, one of the hundreds under his company's name. Maybe she'd been one of the people his policies had hurt. The thought made him sick. He forced himself to breathe, to calm his pulse. He reminded himself why he was here. Not to be seen, not to justify, but to listen, to understand. But now the air felt charged, different. The fragile anonymity he'd built that morning was unraveling thread by thread. He thought about leaving, walking out the door, driving back to his office, pretending this had been enough. But something in Keisha's eyes anchored him. She knew who he was. And yet she hadn't said a word. That silence meant something. Maybe mercy, maybe a test. Malcolm leaned back in the booth, staring at the condensation sliding down his cup. The fryer popped again. Ron cursed at the delivery driver. Keisha laughed faintly at something the cashier said. And amid that ordinary noise, Malcolm felt a chill crawl up his spine. Not from fear of being caught, but from the creeping suspicion that he wasn't the only one undercover in this room. He didn't know it yet. But this was the moment the game had changed. The lunch crowd arrived like a slow storm. Tired faces, steel-toe boots, neon vests. They ordered the same things they always did. Combo meals, black coffee, the cheapest comfort a paycheck could buy. By noon, the restaurant was a blur of motion. Grease hissed. Timers beeped. Voices called orders over one another. The smell of fries and frustration mixed in the air. Malcolm stayed busy stacking condiment boxes in the storage area behind the counter, trying to look useful. His heart still hadn't settled since the whisper that morning. Every time someone passed behind him, he felt a flicker of suspicion crawl up his neck. The back room was cramped. Concrete floor, humming fridge, the sharp tang of bleach. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead. He bent to lift another box and the door swung open. Ron stood there, one hand braced against the frame. His eyes were cold and certain. "Funny thing," Ron said, voice rough as sandpaper. "I've been trying to place your face all morning. Thought maybe I seen you on TV." Malcolm straightened slowly. His mind scrambled for the lie, the cover story. "I get that a lot. Must be one of those familiar faces." Ron stepped closer, the smell of tobacco on his jacket. "Familiar, yeah. Like the guy who told us all we were family while he cut our benefits last winter." The words hit like a punch. Malcolm kept his voice even. "You've got the wrong man." "Do I?" Ron's jaw tightened. "Because I remember that speech. Hard work is the soul of the company. You stood right there on the video feed. Suit, tie, smile, big as Sunday. You ain't no delivery driver." The humming fridge filled the silence between them. Malcolm could hear his own pulse. He wanted to deny it again, to retreat behind the lie, but something inside him sagged instead. A tiredness deeper than fear. Before he could answer, Keisha's voice came from the doorway. "Ron, the fryer's smoking again." "I need you out front." Ron didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on Malcolm. "You ought to be careful walking in here, boss. Folks don't forget what it feels like to get left behind." Then he pushed past Keisha, the door banging shut behind him. Keisha stayed. She didn't speak right away. The light flickered, turning her face into a collage of shadow and warmth. "So," she said finally, keeping her tone low, "you really are him." Malcolm ran a hand over his face. "You knew?" "I guessed," she said. "The way you watch people. The way you flinched when Ron talked about corporate. Most folks just roll their eyes. You looked guilty." He let out a breath that was half a laugh, half surrender. "Maybe I am." Keisha leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Why are you here?" "I needed to see it," he said. "Not the numbers. Not the reports. The truth." She studied him for a long moment. "You built something big, Mr. Reeves. Bigger than you, bigger than all of us. But you stopped walking through the front door a long time ago." The words landed soft but sure. Malcolm nodded slowly. "You're right." Keisha tilted her head toward the dining area. "Ron's angry because he's been here 21 years. Lost his pension when they switched contractors. He don't hate you, he hates what you turned into." Her eyes softened then, just a flicker. "You still got a chance to be the man your mother probably thought you'd be." Malcolm looked down at his hands, the hands that used to hold ledgers and contracts. "I don't even know where to start." "Start by listening," she said. "And don't run this time." A timer beeped sharply out front, pulling her away. She paused at the door. "I'll keep Ron from saying anything. But you should talk to him before you leave. He deserves that." When she was gone, Malcolm stood alone in the humming half-dark of the back room. The cold air from the fridge brushed his skin. He realized how long it had been since anyone had spoken to him without fear or deference. Keisha's words still hung in the air like the smell of coffee, warm, honest, impossible to ignore. He took a slow breath and looked toward the swinging door, where the sounds of the restaurant pulsed on, the beeping, the chatter, the small symphony of survival. Somewhere out there waited the people he had forgotten. Somewhere out there truth had been whispering his name for years. And for the first time in decades, Malcolm Reeves, CEO, success story, symbol, felt like a man who'd been found. The rhythm of the afternoon was slower, heavier, the kind of hour that stretched thin between exhaustion and endurance. The restaurant's energy had sunk into that familiar mid-shift fatigue. The air was thick with the smell of reheated oil and the hum of machines that had long forgotten rest. Malcolm stepped out from the back room, carrying a crate of paper cups like any other worker. But something inside him had shifted. The disguise was still on, the faded hoodie, the scuffed shoes, yet it no longer felt like armor. It felt like truth. For the first time, he wasn't performing. He was present. Keisha caught his eye from the counter, giving him a nod that said, "Keep your head down, but keep going." Her quiet courage steadied him more than she knew. Ron hadn't forgotten. He kept working the grill, but every spatula slam, every muttered curse was aimed in Malcolm's direction. The man's resentment wasn't sharp anymore. It was steady, controlled, the kind that had burned long enough to know its own shape. When the crowd thinned again, Ron finally turned from the grill. "Hey, boss," he said, voice carrying just enough bite to make the words sting. "We got time to talk now, don't we?" Malcolm set down the crate. The fryer hissed, filling the silence. "Sure," he said quietly. "Let's talk." Ron wiped his hands on his apron, the motion slow, deliberate. "You really thought you could walk in here, wearing a name tag like the rest of us, and nobody'd notice?" "I wasn't trying to fool anyone," Malcolm said. "I was trying to understand." "Understand?" Ron laughed, low and humorless. "Understand what?" "The smell of cheap grease? The pain in your back after a 12-hour shift? You don't need to understand, man. You just need to care. And you stopped doing that a long time ago." Malcolm met his eyes. "You're right." Ron blinked, thrown for a moment by the honesty. "I stopped listening," Malcolm continued. "I thought I was helping by growing the company, by opening more stores, creating jobs. I told myself it was progress. But the higher I climbed, the more people disappeared from view." Ron's face tightened, a battle of anger and disbelief playing behind his eyes. "You think saying that makes it better? You cut our benefits, you slashed hours, and you still sent out them holiday videos telling us we're family. You ever seen a family that couldn't afford rent?" The words hit like stones, each one deserved. Malcolm didn't flinch. He let them land. "No," he said. "I haven't, not for a long time. But I did once." He looked down at his hands, rough now from the morning's work, smudged with grease. "My mom worked 2 jobs. She cleaned offices at night. She'd come home so tired she'd fall asleep sitting up. She told me to work twice as hard so I'd never end up there. And somehow I built the same world she was trying to escape." Ron said nothing. The air between them felt heavy, charged. "I came here to see if the reports were true," Malcolm said. "About the conditions, the hours, the bias. But what I found, it's worse than any report. It's a sickness, a one I created." For a long time, the only sound was the sizzle of the grill. Then Ron finally spoke, voice softer now. "You talk good, boss." "Always did. But talk don't fix broken paychecks." Malcolm nodded. "Then let me do something real." Ron's brow furrowed. "What's that mean?" "It means I don't leave here pretending this never happened. It means you, all of you, get to tell me exactly what's broken. Not to a PR team. Not to some regional manager. To me." Keisha, who had been pretending to clean the coffee station, turned slightly, listening. Ron crossed his arms. "And then what? You go back to your office and write us a nice apology memo?" Malcolm took a step closer. "No, I stay until I know what it feels like again. I work the shifts. I hear the stories. Then I fix it, starting from here." The silence that followed wasn't disbelief this time. It was curiosity, cautious, aching like the first crack of light under a closed door. Keisha spoke up softly. "You really mean that?" Malcolm looked at her. "Every word." Ron shook his head, trying to hide the flicker of hope that crossed his face. "You better be ready for what you're gonna hear, boss. It ain't pretty." "I should have heard it years ago," Malcolm said. The grill popped, scattering tiny sparks of oil across the metal surface. Outside, a train rumbled past again, the same one from that morning. Its whistle carried faintly through the window, a long, lonely sound like something moving forward whether the world was ready or not. Ron turned back to his station, muttering, "We'll see." Malcolm stood there for a long moment, breathing in the scent of smoke and salt, feeling the weight of everything he'd ignored pressing against him. He didn't know if redemption was possible, but for the first time in years he knew where to start. And behind the counter, Keisha smiled quietly, just a small, knowing curve of her lips, as if she'd been waiting for this moment all along. The next morning broke gray and cold, the kind of Midwestern dawn that made even light feel tired. Fog hung low over the parking lot, swallowing the edges of the faded sign that still promised quality you can taste. Inside, the air was thick with yesterday. Old coffee, burned toast, the dull ache of repetition. Malcolm had barely slept. He'd spent the night in the same cheap motel, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying every word Ron had said. By 5:30 a.m., he was back in the restaurant, apron tied, hat low, ready to start another shift. Keisha was already there, brewing the first pot of coffee. She looked up as he walked in, one eyebrow raised. "You came back." "I said I would," he replied simply. She gave a small nod, something between respect and relief. Most people who make promises in this place don't. Ron came in a few minutes later, muttering to himself as he clocked in. When he saw Malcolm behind the counter, his expression hardened, but he didn't say a word. He just turned on the grill and started cooking. The hours passed in a rhythm both exhausting and strangely cleansing. Malcolm took orders, wiped tables, carried boxes from the freezer. He felt the burn in his shoulders, the sting of hot oil on his forearm, the ache in his feet that no leather shoes could soften. Every motion reminded him of who he'd been before the suits. Before the boardrooms, customers came and went. Truckers, nurses, factory hands, each one moving with the same weary grace of people who didn't have the luxury to stop. Some recognized his face vaguely, the way you might remember a stranger from a dream, but no one said a thing. By mid-morning, the rush had faded. The radio played softly, an old Otis Redding song that seemed to hum with quiet sorrow. Ron finally spoke. "You still got that speech ready, boss? The one where you say you've seen the light?" Malcolm paused, wiping down the counter. "No speeches. Not today." Ron gave a short laugh. "That's a first." Malcolm met his gaze. "You were right about me yesterday. About everything. I forgot where I came from. I thought growth was the same thing as progress. But it's not. Growth without care just spreads rot." Ron stared at him, skeptical but listening. "I looked at the payroll reports last quarter." Malcolm continued. "We saved 8% in labor costs by cutting hours. You know what that means in real life. It means people like you lose rent money. It means Keisha skips her kid's field trip. It means I make another $1 million while calling it efficiency." Keisha stopped wiping tables. Her eyes softened. Ron said nothing, his jaw working, his knuckles tightening on the spatula. "I can't undo what I've done," Malcolm said, "but I can start fixing what I can reach. Starting here." He took off his hat, revealing the man underneath. Tired, humbled, stripped of the mask. "This store's getting a full overhaul. Equipment, wages, benefits, staffing. I'll be here until it's done. Not as your boss, as your coworker." The silence that followed was fragile. Ron looked like he wanted to laugh, but the sound never came. "Why now?" he asked finally. "You could have done this from your office. Why get your hands dirty?" Malcolm smiled faintly. "Because the view from my office was too high to see the ground." Ron looked away, blinking hard. "You talk like a preacher, man." "Maybe," Malcolm said. "But I'm here to work like a sinner." For the first time, Ron cracked a smile. Small, reluctant, but real. The door chimed as a customer entered. An elderly woman in a worn coat, leaning on a cane. Keisha greeted her with warmth, poured her coffee before she even asked. Malcolm watched the exchange, a small, quiet kindness that no profit sheet could ever measure. He looked around. The peeling paint, the flickering lights, the weary but resilient faces. He saw not just workers but lives, stories, people who deserved more than slogans. And then, just as he turned to refill the napkin dispenser, he heard it, a voice behind him, soft but clear. "Mr. Reeves?" He froze. The old woman was looking straight at him. "I thought that was you," she said, smiling faintly. "You spoke at my church years ago, said the company was going to change the face of opportunity." Her words hung in the air, gentle but heavy. Keisha and Ron both stopped moving. Malcolm swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "I did." The woman's eyes didn't judge, and they just searched. "Did it work?" The question cut deeper than any accusation could. Malcolm's voice almost failed him. "Not the way I hoped," he said. "But I'm trying to make it right." The old woman smiled again, nodding. "Then you're still in God's hands, son. Don't waste it." She turned back to her coffee, humming softly. Ron exhaled a long, low breath. "Guess the universe just gave you your sermon." Malcolm laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that carried both pain and peace. "Yeah," he said. "And this time I'm gonna live it." Outside, the fog had finally begun to lift. Sunlight spilled across the cracked pavement, catching in puddles like small mirrors. For the first time in a long while, Malcolm felt something close to clarity. Fragile, hard-earned, but real. He turned back to the counter, apron still tied tight. There was work to do, and this time he was ready to do it. By evening, the restaurant felt different, quieter, somehow lighter. The air still smelled of oil and salt and old coffee, but beneath it ran something new, the faint pulse of hope. The day had stretched Malcolm in ways he hadn't felt in years. His body ached, but the ache was honest. It came from labor, not guilt. The dinner rush trickled down to a few late customers, a young couple splitting fries in a corner booth, a weary nurse scrolling her phone, and an old man nursing a black coffee like it was the last good thing left in his day. The sun dipped low, painting the walls in the dim amber glow that made everything look older, softer, almost sacred. Malcolm was wiping down the front counter when Keisha approached, still wearing that tired half-smile that had become her shield. "You did good today," she said, voice low, careful. He chuckled. "I dropped 2 trays, forgot an order, and burned my hand on the fryer. Still better than half the new hires we get." They shared a quiet laugh. Then her tone shifted. "Ron's been watching you all day. I think he's waiting for you to flinch." "I don't blame him," Malcolm said. "He's earned that right." Keisha leaned on the counter, eyes thoughtful. "He's not angry because you're rich. He's angry because he used to believe in you. Most of us did." That truth settled in him like a stone. He wanted to say something, to apologize again, but words suddenly felt small. Before he could speak, the kitchen door swung open. Ron stepped out, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked at Malcolm for a long moment before saying, "Got a minute?" Malcolm nodded, following him into the quiet of the back room. Ron leaned against the freezer, studying him like a man testing the strength of a bridge before stepping on it. "You really mean to change things?" "I do." "Then you should know something before you start." Ron's voice softened, losing its usual edge. "You remember a kid named Darnell Reeves? Worked the night shift down at the Springfield branch about 10 years ago." Malcolm frowned. "Darnell." He paused, searching the name. Then it hit him. "My brother," Ron nodded. "Didn't know he was your kin. Kid was good. Hard worker, quiet, always picked up extra shifts. Then one day corporate closed the store for restructuring. Just like that. No notice, no severance. I was working there too. He said he'd talk to management, make it right." Malcolm's throat tightened. "He never told me that." Ron's gaze held steady. "He didn't get the chance. He died in a car wreck 2 days later. Fell asleep at the wheel driving home after a double. I don't know if you ever knew, but that boy was trying to fix your mess before you even saw it." The room seemed to tilt. The hum of the refrigerator became a low roar in his ears. Malcolm steadied himself on a shelf, his mind spinning. His brother, his quiet, patient brother who'd always told him, "Don't forget where you came from." All this time, he'd told himself the guilt he carried was about the company, about numbers and policies and fairness. But it was deeper, personal, blood deep. Ron looked down, his voice rough. "He believed in you, boss. Said you were going to change things from the inside. Maybe he was right, just took you a while." Malcolm couldn't speak. His vision blurred, and for the first time in years, he didn't fight it. The tears came quietly, sliding down his face in silence. When he finally found his voice, it was barely a whisper. "Thank you for telling me," Ron nodded once. "Didn't tell you to hurt you. Told you so you'd understand what this means to people like us. What it costs." Malcolm wiped his face, straightened, and met Ron's eyes. "Then that's where we start. Not with apologies, with change." Ron studied him a moment longer, then gave a slow nod. "Guess we'll see if you mean it." He turned and walked out, leaving Malcolm alone in the hum and cold of the storage room. Malcolm stood there for a long time, his brother's name echoing in his head. Darnell. The boy who never made it home. The boy who'd believed in him when he'd stopped believing in himself. When he finally stepped back into the restaurant, Keisha was locking up. The lights were dim, the neon sign outside buzzing faintly. "You all right?" she asked softly. Malcolm looked around one last time. The scuffed floor, the flickering bulbs, the lingering scent of fryer grease. He smiled, faint but real. "Not yet," he said. "But I will be." Keisha nodded. "Then we will too." She handed him her apron. "You're closing tonight." He looked at her, surprised. "Consider it your initiation," she said, teasing lightly. He laughed, a genuine sound this time. "Fair enough." As she left, the door chime jingled softly, the sound of an ending and a beginning colliding in one small note. Malcolm turned off the lights, one switch at a time, until the restaurant lay quiet beneath the hum of the old neon sign. He stepped outside, the cool night air filling his lungs. The parking lot stretched out before him, cracked and uneven. But it was his ground again, real, solid, and waiting. He looked up at the dark sky, the stars faint but steady, and whispered, "I see you now, little brother." Then he got in his car, rolled down the window, and drove off into the night. Not as the boss returning home, but as a man finally coming back to where he belonged. And somewhere behind him, in the glow of that tired old restaurant, the sign flickered once, as if the light itself had decided to stay on just a little longer.